So, hi, welcome to Pathfinders podcast. I am super excited to welcome Emer, who is not only a friend of mine, she is an expert looking after, encouraging, welcoming teenagers to the world of being an adult in very productive and I would say functional ways. So, hi, Emer, how are you?
I'm grand. I'm delighted to be here.
Great,
Thanks
great.
for
Thank
having
you
me.
for your book. It's so beautiful. Like I've just finished being a parent to a teenager. They had just reached 20. And I looked through it and thought there's so many opportunities there for people who have teens. How is that for you?
I mean, I think the world has changed for teens a lot. And I think the worlds that parents who have teenagers at the moment, they didn't grow up in that world. And if we can't and are not able to stand in that teenager's shoes, it's going to be very difficult to make the connection that so many parents want with their teens. And it often goes haywire anyway, because they're primed to leave the nest and find their own way. So I think as a parent, you need new skills now,
Mm.
absolutely need new skills. And you also need to be able to appreciate that their journey isn't, and the changes within it isn't about you, it's about them. And you have to go on a learning journey with them. And so there's key things as a parent if you want to improve that connection, improve that relationship during what can be challenging years for both parties. You can take them from the world of coaching, and you can just also understand, in terms of the scientific changes that are happening within that body. They may look like they're all grown up on the outside, but actually they're not really always that good. That's not what's going on the inside. And so arming yourself with new skills, I think, is it's the way to go, because we don't get an A to Z guide when we're parents. And why wouldn't you update your skills? You would do it at work. Why wouldn't you do it with your children? So for me, it's been really exciting to be able to put this together, because I work with young people, I coach them, I bring a scientific approach to it, but also I'm also a mother of three. So for me, that's really important to you. We live in a very challenging world. It's overwhelming. It's constantly changing. We get more data in a day now than a person got in their whole life in the 1800s. And for that reason, our brains have not been upgraded to be able to manage that. So we shouldn't be surprised that our bodies are being triggered by stress all the time. And if you don't know how to manage that, well, we're not at our best when we're stressed. And, if you bring two parties together that are stressed, that's double the amount of stress, and we don't function well. So being able to manage emotions is really important too. So there's a huge amount to learn, even with me working with young people and hearing their side of the story, also hearing the side of the parent's story, to be able to bring that all together with what I've gathered over the years in terms of my own development journey. Yeah, it's been lovely. It's been really nice, and it's nice because it's been well received. So thank God it's landed.
It's what struck me about it because we pay so much attention, especially in the work that I do with what happens in the first sort of 0 to 3-ish, in terms of our beliefs and our structure. And then there's this big gap where I remember the kids being beautiful and we loved them and they were, everything to us. And then they started to become adults, under the guise of adults, if you like. And that's where you pick this thing up because there's another layer, I think, in terms of how do we interact in the world as an adult, as a functional adult, um, with those beliefs that we created at that young age.
I think I think what's important is that, when you're a teenager, what you're trying to do is discover who you are. You're primed to leave the nest, because our human survival probably wouldn't be nearly as healthy as it is if we all stayed at home and reproduce there. That wouldn't be very good.
Sure.
So and I think we live in a world where at the moment, in order to be able to figure out who you are, we don't our children aren't encouraged to run around, from quite a young age. We don't hear children playing as much on streets on their own, learning and growing through those experiences. So, we shouldn't be surprised when our teens get to an age where when they haven't had that experience to build confidence, and learn through just daily freedom, that they're struggling even more. And then a lot of them are tuned into a virtual world, which is feeding them stories that are not always helpful. You know, we have a capacity within our brain to have 70% negative thoughts daily anyway.
Yeah, where did that 70% come from? Because that's fascinating to be, to be tipped across the board in a sort of a negative way, in a way that is just um, giving more credence to the negative.
My feeling around that, where it's come from in terms of, is it's survival. If you're a bit more careful, so you're not going to die, so you look at things in more of a negative light, but it doesn't mean that you have to be stuck in that. It's about how we train our brains, because they're like plasticine, and it's where we put our energy, it's where we put our focus, it's the story we tell ourselves. And also you'll find that the teenage brain has been massively rewired. And so it's like a tree that's, after having a lot of apples have come off it, we're in the autumn, you need to cut back elements of the brain that are no longer being used. Because when we're born, we get access, if I use the analogy, to a million billion channels that we can tune into. But Mother Nature is very generous, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to use all those channels. So rather than having all spare bits of connections that are no longer necessary in our brain, it goes through a pruning process. And that starts at the back of the brain, in the limbic brain. So they're tuned into their emotions, and it works its way all the way through to the front prefrontal cortex. And that doesn't happen overnight. So it starts to kick in early teens, 13, 14, and all the way through to the early 20s. But also more recent research shows there's still, that pruning process is ongoing. And it can even still be operational, not to the same extent as being a teenager, into your 30s and 40s. So I think when you're stuck in your emotions, and you don't have your prefrontal cortex to balance it, which is all about, planning, good decision making, managing your risks, managing your impulses. If we don't know who we are, and we're trying to figure that all out, and your hormones are raging, and we know that young people can't handle stress as well as an adult can in terms of their brains. We also know that their feelings, in terms of feeling something really good, is at a much heightened level than it is in an adult. So if they're feeling good, they really feel good. If they're feeling down, they're feeling really lousy. And something as simple as, I've seen it stories myself, simple as losing a dog and breaking up with your boyfriend can seem like the most extreme thing possible, whereas to an adult, it's a moment in time and you'll get over it more quickly. So I think the most important thing you can do as an adult is to understand they're not connecting the dots in the way that you are, and don't expect them to. And if you come from a place of curiosity as to why they have behaved or reacted in the way they did, rather than from a place of judgment, you're going to learn so much more, and you're going to help them, because you'll help them explore why they ended up in that place.
Yeah, I was really struck in a way by some of the content in your book and on your website that I think a lot of adults could use. So, and obviously, if you're saying that they are still happening in the 30s and maybe even 40s, seems to me that there's no specific drop-off age where we would call ourselves, okay, now I'm an adult. Because there's people who, can act childish their entire life. There's people who seem grown up, even though they're quite young. So I am really struck by, is it just a brain thing, or is there a heightened connection in that space to their spiritual side, or is that comes later? How would you place all of that in terms of research?
I think with the science, it doesn't often focus on the spiritual side of things in the same way that it might do in terms of brain function. And I think our experiences have a massive impact on us, and I think how we're raised has a significant impact on us. What values were we brought up with? What were our experiences? Some people from a very early age know what it is that they want to do. Others wander around in the dark for a long time before they figure it out. And I don't have an answer for that. I don't know why that is. All I know is that in terms of kind of with teens, with their brain function, it's very changeable during those early teens into their 20s. What happens into their 30s and 40s is less intense, but there's still activity going on. I think the thing about our brains is that our IQ can go up or down. It's not set. People have this idea that, your brain is, you get what you get, but it's about, what you're exposed to. It's about how much of your brain you use. It's like your body. If you work it out, then it's going to be fitter and healthier. And I think there's something around emotional energy and making sure that there isn't trauma. Because I think we can get stuck in trauma. We can get stuck in our stories. And we know in the body, for example, that, when we have had a stressful event, and we have a capacity as humans to relive that event. Maybe, I'm not sure if other animals do it, but we have the most amazing imagination. So we can propel ourselves into the future and worry about what's going to happen. And we can be stuck in a story of something that we've been through that's traumatic. And your body can't tell the difference. It really can't tell whether that same traumatic event is happening for real or not. And so I think the more trauma you have in your body and the more traumatic experiences you have, and if you're stuck in them in terms of thinking about them and reliving them and going back over them, it affects our ability to be healthy. And I think that has a big effect, because if your body is constantly stressed, it's in survival mode. And if we're in survival mode, then we're only tapping into the kind of old thinking patterns that we normally have. So we get the same results. Whereas you will know the amount of information that's available to us in any given second. I think is it 11,000?
Depends on where you look, but yes, it goes from,
it's a lot. But and that's our unconscious. It's a huge amount of data that's available to us if we're open and we're not stressed. And so if we can be in positive emotions, if we can be calm, if we're in reason, if we feel we're in the kind of the love zone, enlightened zone, maybe, because then we have more information available to us, because we're not all our organs aren't, all the blood isn't going to our extremities, gearing up all our muscles to run. And as a result of that, then if we're in stress, we're not functioning well. And I think that stops us seeing what else is out there for us, because we live the same pattern, we live the same story. And you have to be able to let go of stress. You need to know how to manage it. And that's why I think a calm mind is so important, enabling people to find that spiritual path. Because if you're in stress, it's very difficult you're living from a place of fear rather than from a place of abundance.
Yeah. And so the thing that you just said is really interesting about the body not knowing the difference, because when somebody is reliving that trauma, I wonder whether taking the time to meditate on a regular basis and go and reprogram everything that you're experiencing, because the mind is one thing, but when the body develops as a child, the mind comes out of the heart cells. So the heart is actually being shown to be a far more intelligent mechanism. But we all know the mind will go blah, 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 and never stop talking and all of that, try and take up all the space. So even though I think most teenagers are resistant to it, certainly mine, it is simply meditation and finding the simplicity of the moment important for everyone.
Absolutely. And we know that even though the mind is one system and the heart is the other, but if we can get the rhythm right between the two, well, you've got a powerhouse, haven't you? I always say a calm mind is your superpower. So important. And we can train it, and we need to train it. If we can train it to think about bad things, we can train it to think about more positive things. And when we can just reduce the stress, calm down the anxiety, release the fear, then actually you can create what you want. But if you're stuck in fear stories, if you're stuck in anxiety, you're stuck in stress, then, well, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're gonna create what you believe.
Yeah. And so there's another chapter I wanted to talk about, which I'll move to in a minute, but I am really struck by the sense that each of us have this possibility of choice. I was actually writing this in my own. I'm writing a book at the moment, about the stories that we tell ourselves, exactly what you were just saying, and how it is considered very unusual to let go of the story of your life. Like, we just keep telling it over and over again. But in actual fact, it's nonsense as well. We can just simply let go of it. So it is fascinating to be able to see, even at that really young age, what can we let go of? In terms of trauma, in terms of, I don't know, like being bullied, taking things personally, all of that, and actually seeing that. And this is what I'd love to get your opinion on, letting go in terms of how those things come to you, i.e., that's that person's issue, that's their issue, not yours, and really seeing that difference between the two people.
I think for me, it's about self-awareness. We teach in schools, we teach maths, we teach French, we teach all those subjects. But do we ever teach somebody, who are you? What makes you tick? It's obvious. Of course, it needs to be done in the world we're in now, because they're bombarded with information that they actually don't know who they are anymore. And the pressures are huge. You've got pressures on social media to look this way, be this way. There's much more pressure in education than when I was growing up. I had 2 exams I had to do. I can't remember any of the others. And I don't remember doing a lot in between. And I absolutely believe that there's a lot more pressure in the home, because parents are more pressured, because again, there's all this need for materials. You got to have this, you got to have that. But not only that, young people are hanging out with their parents way more than they ever did in the 50s. Yeah. Mums might have been at home, but their kids were out. They were running around. They were playing. They were grounding themselves. They weren't overwhelming their brains. And they were learning through lived experiences. And also, they were more socially connected daily, because they got to go play with their friends. And they may not have got on all the time, but they learned through those experiences, rather than learning through a screen relationship where anything can be said in a nanosecond. So, and that can really hurt. And we know that empathy isn't big for teens, so you can say really nasty things, but it's a lot easier to do it from behind a screen than it is to have to look someone in the eye and do it. And so I think that human connection, and if you're not standing in front of them, there's so much communication that gets lost in the mix. And I think if that's disconnected, then the room for pain, the room for hurt, the room for just knowing that you're being left out of a party, because you can find out when you go online, as opposed to years ago, you were, you just hadn't a clue because no one told you. So for me, there's a lot more opportunity for pain because we're not connecting in the way that we used to. But basically, we're born for connection. That's what we are. We over the centuries, we were being in a group was much more likely to help us survive. And if we're slung out of a group now, even as an adult in a workplace, if you're not part of the group, that can really hurt. And teens, they don't have those skills to navigate. So for me, it's all about building the self-awareness and understanding that you are only responsible for your own behavior. And to a point, as a teen, you can't be responsible for all of it because things are going on. If you don't know what's going on, you don't know how to start to manage it. But we're ultimately responsible for our own behavior, and we're not responsible for other people's. And I love this. There's one question I always remember is, if someone's been really nasty to you, the question to ask is, what is going on in your life that feels so bad that you need to try and make me feel bad?
Yeah, and that puts it back onto the let's call them perpetrator, right? Because it's about them and their influence over their world, and you're just collateral damage if you happen to be in the way of that, or if you witness that.
And if you don't have skills to create the protection against that, then that's leaves you very vulnerable. And if you're stuck in your emotions, you're not engaging as much self-awareness, you're not engaging as much empathy, you're not engaging kind of logic and decision making. You're kind of in a roller coaster of emotions. And if you don't understand how emotions work and how they have different energies and how they can lift you up or drag you down based on your story, we're back to the story, then you're just going on a kind of a roller coaster where you're constantly responding to the externals in your life rather than being able to tune into what it is that you want to create, and not finding that your energy and attention is getting distracted all the time. And I think that's one of the most important skills that we can teach young people now, because it's very easy to get distracted.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the word purpose really briefly, but I think it's really important because there's layers of purpose that go beyond this life, as you know. And that layers of purpose just gives us these more and more expanded ways of looking at our life as we get older, as we dig deeper. So this brings me back to the other chapter I would love to talk about, which is just in your book. It's titled something like The Human Connection and our need for love, for love and understanding. It's like it's such a fundamental thing that we forget we're here to do that. And we can get into survival, we can get into our head, it can tick over all of these different stories. But the reality is, when we come back down to it, it's just about the connection.
Yeah, I think the first couple of pages in the book, there's a quote that I got from my 4-year-old son. And he said, "It's all about love, Mum. You just need to fill your heart with love." Well, I nearly fell over when he said that at 4. And I just thought, they're so wise, our children. And then, things happen to them along the way. And I've never forgotten that. And we also know that love is a much more higher vibrating emotion, because, our emotions can be measured scientifically. And when we're in that state, we feel so much better. We're much more expansive in the way that we engage with people. We're not in judgment mode. We're in curiosity mode. We're in learning mode. And, there's a reason why they say love makes the world go round. We all know when we look at something that's kind of very negative, or just, the conflicts that are happening around the world at the moment, you watch that stuff, you come away and it doesn't make you feel good. Whereas if you look at a brand newborn baby, it has a totally different impact on you. And we know that so many young people at the moment with their mental health are stuck in those lower vibration emotions. There's a world economic risk report that came out in 2021. We've already a couple of years on from that shows that up to 80% of young people are vulnerable to depression, anxiety, and disillusionment. Because I think a big part of it is to do that social comparison that's going on social media. And we know that if you don't believe that you have an 80% chance of being able to attain a goal and just a 20% chance of failure, you won't get out of bed in the morning. And of course, what stories are they being fed? Everyone's life is perfect. You can achieve this. Look at me. But we know the reality. That's not the human condition. I think one of the most important things that we need to do with young people now is we need to create the space for them to be able to turn up and be their vulnerable selves, so the true stories can come out, so that we can connect through that human experience and say, I see you because you feel what I feel. And that's where the bonds and connection come from. But while we're all pretending to be what I call the Marilyn Monroe smile, everything's fabulous on the outside, but I'm dying on the inside. Nobody's showing up as themselves. And you can't find true love if you don't have truth.
Yeah, or self-love, I think. Really important to start there.
Yeah, and if you don't believe in yourself, and we also know young people that they're more vulnerable to mental health issues anyway. And for me, that's why this book is important, because it's so important to develop something that's called a good adult in their lives. We need more good adults in the world that can be there to support them. So I would see them as a kind of a lighthouse parent.
Mm.
They're going to fall up on the rocks. Get used to it. Remember what you were like when you were a teen. The problem is most parents have forgotten. And you're there to be there to help them and guide them. You don't want to be the helicopter parent where you're smothering them with your own needs. I see it often where, parents are so focused on getting their kids through school, to get the grades, to get to the university, to get to this, where they come out the other end and they still don't know what they want to do because they were following a path that was their parents' need rather than theirs. And I believe that everyone has a talent, everyone has a skill, and it's your job during these years to really empower your young people to understand who they are. Because how can you live a life you love if you don't know who you are?
Yeah, and this is the thing too, because the aspect of pushing your children through based on what you think is going to be right, pushing them into whatever's good for them, what keeps them happy, something that's going to set them up in life. All of that is true from where you're coming from, right? That's coming from the perspective of parents who have got a little bit of perspective. They can see where the world's going. They want to make those decisions so that the child can deal with that later. And then I have clients who are rich, who are wealthy. Just one or two have done very, very well, and they're miserable because they're not following their truth, right? They're not doing what they want to do. They know it's good for them financially, but they don't have that aspect of that natural joy that comes from doing something that you love. And let me just say this one more thing before I hand it back to you and get your opinion on it, is that when you've got somebody who does that, as they get older, they become more and more attached to it. What's got them there, their life, they can retire in all sorts of opulence. They can walk up and down the beach and enjoy the last days of their life, but they know that in a way their life's been wasted. And that kind of brings me back to the point around what it is that we're truly here to do that is going to make life better for everyone. So what do you think of that?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I think everyone has a talent. I think everyone has a skill. I think everyone has a purpose. And I think it's more about serving a purpose beyond yourself. That's where the greatest reward comes from. Because, if you're constantly seeking all that material stuff outside you, you never fill the vacuum. That vacuum doesn't get filled with material stuff. It just gets filled with more stuff. But actually, the one thing that'll fill you up with more than anything is like a day of doing something you love, being with people you love, making a difference to people's lives. And I know young people really feel that. And I think the problem with the amount of suicide we have with young people and generally around the world at the moment, there's a missing connection, a missing sense of belonging. And that's a disconnect from inside, but also not being able to connect and feel that they have a place. I think we've eroded a lot of our communities. And technology's here to stay. Don't get me wrong. And there's some amazing things you can do with it. But if you're not based in truth, if you're not in reality, if you're not dealing in reality, then actually you're disconnected from yourself. And the problem at the moment is, the smartphone or a mobile phone, it's like a hypodermic needle. The press of a button, you can get what you like. We know addiction is gone through the roof because people are feeling pain, because, we tend to want to get rid of our pains. But the way to deal with our pains is to be able to work through our resistance, to work through our fears and know that we can achieve. And when we achieve and we build and we create, and God, you're not saying it's easy every day, but it's so much more fun because you feel fabulous when you do it.
Yeah.
And I think they're the things we need to do to help young people. We need them to know that connection starts with them. It's not from something that's outside them. And when you help them understand their talents, help them find a path that's not just focused on how much can I earn at the end of it. I'm amazed actually, because I coach a lot of young people to figure out who they want to be, because they feel so overwhelmed. So many of them come to me, they can't see the wood from the trees. And the one thing I really find with a lot of them right now is that they're looking for that spiritual path. They want to do something that's meaningful in the world. And often some of them feel quite conflicted about that because they see others might want to go and work in the city or whatever, but their heart is telling them they want something else. And I think we need to be able to have a different narrative now, that it's the material. Of course, we all need a level of to be able to eat and survive and be warm and, to be able to live a life of a certain amount of comfort. But overabundance and just too much of that stuff, it'll just drown who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Mm.
So the actual title of your book, now available on Amazon, is?
Okay, so it's Understanding Teen Stress and Anxiety, A Parent's Guide to Building Love and Connection.
Yeah, beautiful. And I actually think that anyone with a child, whether it's a teen or somebody in their 20s, something like that, even 30s, 40s, I don't know, 50s, 60s, there's something in the work that you are helping parents with that is also deeply personal for the parents, for the alleged good adults, to really shift them. Yeah.
I think we need to, I think what I've tried to do in the book is also take parents on a journey in terms of their own journey. Like, who are you? What are you bringing to the party? What's your story? And how is that story interacting with your teen? And if we don't, as adults, recognize that, the quality of our relationships often are down to us. And, we can be surrounded, we could have a bully in front of us, but if we don't feel grounded in ourselves, we can see it for what it is. And unfortunately, through life, we pick up baggage. And it's being able to recognize what that baggage is so that you can, what I say is, shine a light on it. Because we all have it. We inherit some from our parents. We gather more as we go along, and then we give it to our kids. So if we can start to shine a light on that and know that we can let it go, and then be more focused in terms of our energy and our attention on what we want to create rather than what we're scared from and what we're running away from. For me, that's where empowerment comes. And don't make, what I really stress in the book is, don't make this journey with your teen and them not behaving in the way you expect them to personal. They're just on a developmental phase, and you just need to be beside them to help them along the way. And the more love you can give them, the better they're going to be. And that's not to say love has no boundaries, but it's not about, they don't need your judgment. They do enough of that themselves. They don't, and they get enough of it outside the home. They don't need your anger, and they don't need your stress. If there's one thing I learned on my journey as a parent, and at one point I was, I was raising my son on my own, stress was not a friend of me or my child. And you have to find ways as a parent to manage it. And there's, we know there's a billion techniques and tools out there. So take the time to change how you feel and how you show up in the world, because that will transform your relationships. And you do great work. I'm very grateful to the work that I've done with you. It's been transformational for me. And so, you do fabulous work too.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing that. I think that's absolute gold, both for parents who've got teens and for just people in general.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to be here with you today, Mike. And I am a bit croaky today, so I'm probably a couple of octaves down the normal, but I hope everyone can still hear me.